Am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am. Now you are perfectly clear.
Yeah. All right. I think I was not able to unmute myself. There's a problem. So we'll just check for Ishi ma'am also. She's going to be online very soon. So we'll just check her audio also.
Yes, ma'am. She has joined.
Okay, I can't see her, but.
Should I stay with this one? First slide.
Can you see the screen, Roshan?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
Okay, my
Yes,
screen.
ma'am.
Ishi's screen.
Hi,
Hi, Ishi.
Dr. Hi, can you see me?
Yes, absolutely. I can see the presentation also.
Wonderful. So is it half the screen?
Yes, you have to go on the slide share.
Yeah, but you can see half the screen. It's visible, na?
It's visible, yeah. You go on the slide share mode, no?
You can read. I can reduce the size of my image if you want, if it's not clear.
No, it is absolutely clear to me.
Okay, fine. I don't see myself. Screen?
Good morning, everybody. May I request you all to kindly mute yourselves and as far as possible, keep your videos also switched off because that gives you a better clarity and there'll be less noise and buffering happening.
Yeah.
It's a gentle reminder for everybody to kindly mute yourselves, kindly cooperate with us, and keep your videos also off so that we are able to actually hear the experts and listen to them clearly. We're going to just go live in within 3 minutes' time. All those who are unable to join will have to join us on the YouTube link, which also Dr. Roshan has shared in your chat box. So please share with your friends who have not been able to join there. Ms. Bhattacharya, may I request you to kindly switch off your video? Amreen also, may I request you if I'm audible? There'll be a lot of distractions otherwise. Amreen, thank you. All right, let's get started. It's 11:31. A very warm welcome to the third food allergies webinar. And today, as we know, that we're going to talk about dietary management of celiac disease. I'm so grateful to each one of you for showing so much support. Those of you who've not been able to register on this platform, may I request you to send the word to your friends that we are also streaming live on YouTube, and the link has been shared already in your chat box. Let's understand the background of why we are talking about food allergies in just not one of its kind webinar, but these are series of webinars, and we're trying to understand the problem which is also actually bothering our food industry as well as the layman. One of the greatest challenges of our times is we need to produce not just nutritious, wholesome, tasty, good quality food, but it has to be absolutely safe for consumption. And the challenges of our lifetime is that our lifestyles have changed, our eating habits have changed, and these in certain ways have contributed to a whole lot of food ingredients which is just not being regionally grown and produced, but we are also importing them. And that is one of the reasons the research is suggesting that a whole lot of people are facing allergic reactions, and about 76% of these food allergy related statistics globally, what we are undergoing is actually a food allergy epidemic. About 1 to 2% of the adults and about 5 to 8% of the children, which is equivalent to about 1.5 million people, seem to be suffering from one form of food intolerance or allergy. In India, there are about 3% of Indians who are facing the problem with food allergies. And do you know that majority of them are under the age of 40 years? Food allergies are also causing about 30,000 emergency treatments and about 100 to 200 deaths per year. About 3 million people have peanut allergy alone in our country, and about 5% people are supposed to be either gluten intolerant or are suffering from absolute food allergy related to gluten, which is known as celiac disease. And that's why today we have the best known and the person who's going to talk about today dietary management of celiac disease is none other than Ishi Khosla, who needs actually no formal introduction. She is one of the most well-known, well-read, and a very, very renowned clinical nutritionist. She's, besides a practicing nutritionist, also an avid writer, a columnist, and has authored several books. She's also an entrepreneur. I think all of us are very familiar with Whole Foods. Most of the leading hospitals have that particular outlet. And I know that what kind of hardcore research it takes to come out with products which can actually cater to people with special requirements or have therapeutic needs. She has authored books like Eating at Work, The Diet Doctor, Is Wheat Killing You, and The Cholesterol Facts, to name just a few. She has been extensively writing and actually addressing the needs of the consumers through her popular articles in leading national newspapers and magazines. She's been recognized as one of the most powerful, one amongst the 25 most powerful women in the country by the India Today group, has been a distinguished alumnus 2011 of Lady Evan College, has been a recipient of Women's Achievers Award in the field of nutrition by the Imperial and Cancer Patient AIDS Association, and also won the Dietary Women's Achiever Award. Her list goes on and on. I think I'll spend about half an hour just talking about her achievements, but let's hear it from the experts, that what is this all about when we talk about gluten intolerance, which has become so rampant in our country, and just by eliminating that one gluten from your diet, I think so many people who are facing this problem feel so much more better. So may I hand over now to Ms. Ishi Khosla. Over to you. Thank you, Ishi, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Am I audible, Dr. Rao?
Yes, absolutely. Clear and loud.
Wonderful. I'll just...
Just a gentle reminder to everybody to please switch off their videos also. Otherwise, we'll be forced to remove you because, buffering starts and we have an issue then. A gentle reminder, please, before ma'am starts.
Hello. Hello.
And you have already shared. Is my presentation loaded? Is it visible to you, Dr. Rao?
No, Ishi, I think you have to reload that. Just exit and then reload. Stop presenting and then start presenting.
Okay, just 1 minute. Just my presentation needs to be reloaded. So, one man's food, my presentation needs to be reloaded. It's here.
Urja, can you please switch off your video? Thank you so much.
It's on mute.
Yeah, just bear with us. Ma'am is just loading her presentation. Yes, we can see Ishi now.
Can everyone see my presentation?
Not yet, Ishi. We were able to see earlier, but now we can't see anything.
Yeah, I think there's something which was.
We are just trying to load the presentation, so please bear with us. Richa, Durgesh, Nandini, and Jayashri. There is some technical snag, so ma'am is just loading the presentation. Please bear with us. Yeah, there we go. We can see now, Ishi.
Sorry. I just didn't this. I think you can see it now, Dr. Rao.
Absolutely, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I had set it up, but then I'm not so familiar with Google Meet, so I guess I pressed something which went. Okay. So once again, thank you very much for having me today on this talk about this subject, which is very close to my heart, both celiac disease and wheat-related disorders. And I feel, how one man's food can be another man's poison is best exemplified by this condition, because wheat is food to more than half the world, and yet it can be poison to some people, and it seems to be threatening the health of many more people than we had ever realized. And so this topic is of real relevance to all of us. And today I plan to talk about not only celiac disease, but wheat-related disorders, which include non-celiac wheat sensitivity and dermatitis herpetiformis, and the prevalence of these conditions, and how to diagnose them, and how to manage them. I think the listening audience, most of them may be very familiar with the basics of celiac disease, but nevertheless, I will speak a bit before I go on to just the management. On first of all, the history of celiac disease. The association between food and something in the cereals and health went back to the 2nd century AD, when Arrhenius from Cappadocia, Turkey, found that there was something which was causing in the food, which was causing inflammation and pain of the abdomen and the intestines. So that is called coeliac. So he called it coeliacs, and that's how coeliacs became celiac later. So it has had a long history of some kind of association. And it was as early as 1950 when Dr. William Dick from Netherlands during the World War II time found that in Netherlands, when there was a scarcity of bread and cereals, the symptoms of celiac sprue actually, when it was called celiac sprue, basically, and those symptoms vanished. And when the Swedish planes again airdropped the parcels of bread in the population, the symptoms began to relapse. And then he published his work in the Journal of Gastroenterology that long ago. And since then, I think the learnings about this disease have only been growing. And in the last decade, I think we've seen the maximum research on this area, to the extent that today there is a full-fledged journal from 2016, a Journal of Celiac Disease, which is dedicated just to this condition. And the interesting part of celiac disease is the way it has evolved in terms of our learning. Just like the COVID virus, when we began, we knew very little, and today we know so many more manifestations and presentations of the virus. And similarly with celiac disease, the manifestations, basically celiac disease, I'm sure the listening audience here knows, that it is inflammation caused by the protein in wheat called gluten in sensitive people, where it damages the intestinal wall. It's called the villi, which are the absorption surfaces, causing what we call malabsorption of nutrients. It causes inflammation and a leaky gut, or what we call intestinal permeability. And that leads to a whole bunch of other associated conditions. So it's not only malabsorption, but it is also connected with other disorders and diseases, particularly autoimmune. In fact, celiac disease itself is an autoimmune condition and is associated with several autoimmune conditions. So first of all, it was believed to be a rare condition. And today we know that it's not rare from the data which Dr. Rao has already presented. And we know that in India, while we have limited data, but still we are consistent with the world average of 1%, which is a huge number. And the fact that it was meant to be a childhood diarrheal disease, that was the association earlier. And today we know that the average age of diagnosis of celiac disease is between 45 to 50 years, actually between 40 to 50 years, which is a real shift in the spectrum. And the spectrum actually is from 9 months to 90 years. So average age of diagnosis is middle age, which means you can be living with it and not knowing that you have it. So those are new learnings. And the diarrheal part, that, it was a diarrheal disease. And today we know less than 30% of people actually present with diarrhea, and most of them do not have or have symptoms outside the gut. So for every diagnosed celiac, there is one, for every diagnosed celiac, there are 8 who do not have digestive symptoms. So you can imagine that how difficult it is to diagnose a condition. And so neither is it rare, neither is it diarrheal, neither is it childhood. So all of these things have changed, and the symptoms which are outside the gut are so varied. And there are also people who do not have symptoms. Just like in COVID, we may be having asymptomatic carriers, and therefore we have celiac disease in people who have really virtually no symptoms. So the spectrum is wide, and therefore almost more than 90% of celiacs remain undiagnosed. And the reason why the Celiac Society was started in India in 2006 was primarily to focus and create awareness about this condition, both among the lay public and the medical practitioners, and to talk about the diverse ways of how this disease presents. So, in fact, in the UK, the first Celiac Society was started as early as 1968, and one of the reasons why this disease has also not been in the spotlight is not because it's not a grave condition, not because it deserves less attention, but the fact that it requires no pharma company to pitch in. There is no drug to help in celiac disease. There is no vaccine company, and there is no surgery. So none of these conditions really are attractive, and therefore there is very little fund available to create this awareness. And the need for building up the awareness through these societies has become much more important and relevant. So it is a neglected disease, and hence we need to create awareness. And each one of you actually who's listening should become a stakeholder in this initiative. So what is gluten? I think I will just, for the sake of people who have probably not studied this, it is a storage protein of wheat, and it's broken down into gliadin. It's a peptide which has 33 amino acids, and this leads to the inflammation and the destruction of the villi in people who are sensitive. And other forms of grains which have gluten include rye, which is not an Indian grain. It is not the spice which we use in our cooking. It's RYE. It's a European grain. And barley, of course, we have in India. Barley also has gluten. And oats has always been in a controversial position. While it has no gluten, it is not a part of a strict gluten-free diet. And I will talk about this later. And these are, on the left is on the healthy intestines, and on the right are the damaged and the blunted villi, which is detected by an endoscopic biopsy, which is really the gold standard to diagnose celiac disease. Considering the damage of the absorption surfaces of our gut, obviously, like I said, there is malabsorption, and the most common nutritional deficiencies in celiac disease include iron, folic acid, vitamin B12, calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, and zinc. And of course, there are other nutrients and also sometimes macronutrients, including proteins and fats, which can be malabsorbed. So what are the symptoms of celiac disease? Typical symptoms, which I said, which include the classical picture of celiac disease, is diarrhea, some kind of GI disturbances. It could be pain, flatulence, or constipation, nausea, vomiting, and maybe even in children, it could be growth problems, stunting, and anemia. But having seen so many patients clinically, we know that typical symptoms are not very common these days. These are the ones who actually get diagnosed, and the ones who, we see tall celiacs, we see people without anemia with a hemoglobin of 13, and yet having celiac disease confirmed through endoscopic biopsies. So there are a lot of anomalies here. And so we also have, what we call types of celiac disease. I'll just come to that slide later. But if you look at, India's chief public health problems, if we need to put a spotlight on our health issues, we do have, exactly the same public health issues. It's not just that 1% of the population. Iron deficiency is affecting almost 60% women and children in India, malnutrition, diarrhea, which are all also part of wheat sensitivity or celiac disease. So this is something which needs to be highlighted as a public health issue, and maybe it's time for public policies on health and nutrition to include this screening for celiac disease and wheat-related disorders in order to to make an impact on a positive impact on the health of our nation. The associated conditions which come with celiac disease can, outside the gut, include neurological manifestations, ataxia, basically a loss of balance, epilepsy, paralysis, migraines, and even Parkinson's, etc. There could be psychological problems like depression and anxiety, anemia, of course, the deficiencies I've already spoken about. There could be, blood sugar problems. Diabetes is very common, particularly type 1 or the autoimmune kind, which is the type 1.5, as we call it, the late adult onset diabetes, not type 2. Peripheral neuropathy, thyroid disease, liver disease, and cardiomyopathy, lupus, MS, rheumatoid arthritis. So almost all autoimmune conditions are associated with wheat-related disorders and celiac disease. And malignancies, of course, and lymphomas. And these are the endpoints of celiac. When it goes undiagnosed and untreated, this is where it ends. And on skin also, we have several manifestations. There is a very typical manifestation on the skin called dermatitis herpetiformis, which is what we call celiac disease outside the gut, where an endoscopic biopsy has no value because the gut is all right, but the skin is what is showing the damage. And of course, there are other like psoriasis and the typical eczemas and the kind of conditions we see and even alopecia for that matter for hair. These are conditions or manifestations which are associated with celiac disease, and we see these kind of patients come to us sometimes, just for skin problems, and we find out that this patient had celiac disease. Osteoporosis, bone health issues, joint pains, and of course, reproductive issues, polycystic ovaries, infertility. So it's like a multi-system disorder and a multi-symptom disorder. And hence, one needs to be, the index of suspicion has to be very high to be able to diagnose this condition. And we've already talked about the epidemiology, and this is available for anyone to see. So I won't spend too much time here, but it is pretty high in the Sahawaris, which is 5 to 6% in the Arab world. But otherwise, it's an average, global average of 1 in 100. And so I will skip this prevalence study. It's pretty easily available. And what is interesting is that celiac disease is actually on the rise. And very often what one hears is, oh, we are far more aware and we are checking and we have more, tools to diagnose celiac disease. But this is actually, the myth has been busted by a study published in the Journal of Gastroenterology by Dr. Murray, this was a study where he did blood samples of 9,000 Air Force recruits between 1948 and 1954. These samples were analyzed and compared, were studied for celiac disease and compared with recent samples of similar age group men. And that's when they realized that celiac disease has gone up several times, and they say there has been a 400% increase in celiac disease. And several studies now confirm that it has actually gone up 4 to 5 times since the last, since 1970s. So certainly there are issues and in our environment, why it is going up, whether it is the kind of wheat or the lifestyle or whatever combination of multifactorial reasons. But yes, it is on the rise. And this I've already said that more than 90% are undiagnosed. And this number is depending on which study you would see. So, well, this is just a slide I, collectively put together the symptoms, whether it is a celiac disease or any other wheat-related disorder, which I will explain to you shortly. Recurrent digestive complaints, there is milk intolerance or lactose intolerance, liver dysfunction, appetite problems, mouth ulcers, growth failure in children, weight issues, typically not being able to lose or gain weight, flattened. So, like I said, it is a malabsorption disorder, and the typical picture of malabsorption is underweight individual. But we see mostly people we are diagnosing today are overweight and obese. So that's another anomaly. And flattened nails, bruising, easy bruising, which shows vitamin deficiencies, anemia, frequent headaches, bone and joint pains, easy fractures, easy injuries among sports people. Again, a sign, a red flag. Infertility, recurrent miscarriages, giddiness and imbalance, epilepsy, numbness and tingling sensations in the extremities, depression, anxiety, poor attention span. We see ADD, ADHD among children, itchy, and even among adults, actually, blistering rashes, eczema, and psoriasis. So this is just a representation of the kind of celiac diseases. Theoretically, we see typical, atypical, silent, and latent. Silent is really hardly any symptoms, and latent is so let me not spend too much time, but these are more for academic purposes, so I'll skip this one. Like I said, the gold standard for identifying and confirming the diagnosis of celiac disease happens with an endoscopic biopsy. but serology plays an important role for the screening. And there are very good tests today, very accurate, 99% reliable tests in the tissue transglutaminase antibodies, anti-endomycelial antibodies, which are really the most important and most relevant tests today to screen for celiac disease. But there sometimes we have contradictions in serology and biopsies. Sometimes we see that the serology is negative and the biopsy is positive. Sometimes we have a serology positive and the biopsy is negative. So one needs to have a clinical correlation with these symptoms and to be able to diagnose. And there is another way of doing it. Sometimes we need to do an elimination or what we call a challenge. We put the person off wheat-related products completely gluten-free for a period of about 8 to 12 weeks, and then reintroduce and pose a challenge with gluten again. And then we again, see the symptoms, and if there is a relapse in symptoms, then we also have another case to investigate further. So these things are, very sometimes they get very complicated, but today we know that even if you do not have the markers for celiac disease, which are positive, that means the TTG and the EMA, or the biopsy is also not positive, you may still have the same symptoms as celiac disease in the absence of celiac disease. And this is a whole new entity, which is what we call wheat intolerance or non-celiac gluten intolerance. Now, I've used so many words here, but let's stick with one: non-celiac wheat sensitivity, or simply wheat sensitivity in the absence of celiac disease. Why the international, the research community has shifted from calling it non-celiac gluten sensitivity to wheat sensitivity, because we find that it's not causing symptoms. There are other parts of the grain which culprits. So it is now not restricted to just gluten intolerance. It's called non-celiac wheat intolerance. So this is a relatively new area of research, and even in our clinical practice, where we have to recognize the fact that the individual is symptomatic, is suffering on account of wheat, and this is mostly and leading to what we call an increased intestinal permeability, also called the leaky gut. And this is the reason why people who have excessive inflammation or whatever maybe lifestyle, which leads to autoimmunity and deficiencies. And exactly the same picture as I've shared with you for celiac disease. So it has been non-celiac wheat sensitivity has been coined to describe those individuals who cannot tolerate gluten and experience symptoms similar to those with celiac disease without villus atrophy. But having said that, I have to say that while the damage is, while the physiology, pathophysiology is different, the management of celiac disease is versus non-celiac is no different. Often people say, oh, this is not celiac disease, so we can take liberties with our food. We can eat wheat sometimes. So the fact is, that's actually not true. And the management has to be 100% gluten-free diet and a healthy gluten-free diet. I'll come to that later. So this basically, whether it's headache, it's a very common sign for people with NCWS is a headache or foggy mind. And of course, like, the same things, joint pains, numbness. And the only difference is that it is a delayed symptom. So it's called a delayed presentation. It can happen over two days to 7 days of exposure to gluten. So these are, a few differences between celiac and non-celiac. So this is a slide showing, how the tight junctions of the gut lining, it's a single cell lining of the epithelial cells in the gut, which get opened up from the tight junctions. They widen up to cause a leak and cause the undigested or partially digested food and toxins to cross over into the blood leading to a host of problems, just like the way it happens in celiac disease. And some of the causes include too much of alcohol, too many medications, antibiotics, a change in gut flora, parasitic infections, and of course, poor nutrition, poor diets, too much sugar, and stress, etc. And of course, toxins in food like pesticides, etc. So all of these increase the permeability, and this new entity has appeared, and it's far more common than celiac disease. This is basically a triology. We say whether it's celiac or non-celiac, we need a genetic predisposition, we need the environmental toxin, and we need the leaky gut to manifest both the conditions. According to some estimates, 1/3 people in the world are gluten sensitive. Well, we don't have good data for this, so this needs much more now on in the world to identify how many people are suffering. Kind of given you all the conditions which are associated with wheat celiac disease. They apply to wheat intolerance as well. Fibromyalgia, conditions which people like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Most people get this kind of a diagnosis. Oh, you have an irritable bowel, IBS, and then they're treated for that, and this culprit is usually missed. And so I just thought, non-celiac wheat sensitivity. I will just present a case study here of this gentleman who came to me at the age of 34. He came to me for obesity. White skin, and he had depigmented as early as when he was 4 years of age, and he was all white, and he had no problems with that. But when I started his diet, I gave him a flour which.
Sorry, Ishi, I think your voice is breaking in between. Excuse me, Ishi. There is some voice breaking in between happening. We lose your audio in between. Can't hear you.
This gentleman, he had no. Sorry?
Ishi, we're losing your voice. We're losing your audio in between.
Oh.
No problems. You can continue with the case study. We heard that.
Let me see if the signal is quite okay. So he had high RDW, but his hemoglobin was all right. And he had high level of ferritin, which is again marker of inflammation. He had low vitamin B12 and vitamin D. Clue about, because he came to me for his blood, because we are screening for celiac disease every patient. An old test we still do for non-celiac wheat sensitivity, and that marker was positive, and this was. So when I saw the reports, I mentioned to him, I said, I think your vitiligo is a bit wheat sensitivity. You seem to be sensitive to wheat. So he came around and said, ma'am, I've been wanting to tell you that ever since I've started your diet since the last few weeks, and I can't understand what's going on. So I thought I'll go and see my doctor. You can see in the slide, his cheek has got these brown spots. And so every renal.
Sorry, Ishi, your voice is breaking in between. We can't hear you in between for some seconds.
So far. So, and for the first time in my life, I have got pigmentation. So I said,
Ishi, we're not able to hear you clearly.
He was pigmented.
Excuse
Sorry.
me, your voice is breaking very, very often, for a few seconds in
Is
between.
that
Yes. So we can't
okay?
understand
Let
some
me
of the
see.
words in between. Yeah. So,
So basically, this gentleman started pigmenting on a gluten-free diet, which was given to him by default for weight reduction. And then we also found evidence of his wheat sensitivity in one of his tests. And the interesting part is that this person does not have celiac disease. His markers for celiac disease are negative, and had beginnings of liver disease. Otherwise, he was absolutely normal, 30, and that's why he had come to me. And the beauty of this case is that when he decided that he did not want to do this on his face. So his wife said, I don't like your face anymore, so kindly go back to your old diet. And when he went back to eating wheat, the pigmentation actually disappeared. So he became white again. So these are just, examples, and we have many, many more examples to, case studies to showcase the correlation between wheat.
sorry, Ishi, you're breaking up.
Never ever.
Hi, Ishi. Sorry to disturb you.
No.
Yeah,
That's okay. Can
your
you?
voice is breaking continuously. It's like you miss few words and then you come back. It's like for a couple of seconds and then. So if you could just,
Can I use head? So, visible?
it comes and it goes. Somehow there is some probably internet connectivity is an issue. I don't know.
Just one second. So, should I start again and see if it?
We've lost you again.
Let me just check.
Requesting once again, all of you, please switch off your videos. That will just help us to improve the quality. So, Nalin, Devrajan, requesting you, Dolly, Mansi. Yeah, Mr. Devrajan, please bear with us. Yeah, Mr. Siddiqui also, may I request you to switch off your video?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely. Loud and clear. Thank you, Ishri.
Yeah. So this is what we call the grain science. Do you want me to repeat something about the previous slide? Were you able to catch some things? Should I go back to the previous case study?
Just one line to wrap up that case study, that what happened when he had a gluten-free diet.
Okay. I'll just go back to that. So I hope this stays now. So this gentleman is a 36-year-old boy who came to me for weight loss, and when we did his entire investigations, we found him to be wheat sensitive, but his markers for celiac disease were negative. When we looked at his blood profile, he had seemingly iron deficiency. He had some inflammation with high ferritin levels. His vitamin D and B12 were low. His liver enzymes were deranged. And but this all of this appeared only about 4 weeks of his during his consultation. But during that time, I had already shifted his flour to a low glycemic flour, which had no wheat, because wheat is a high glycemic grain. Having mentioned when I saw these reports to him that I think your vitiligo, which you've had since you were age 4 or 5, is maybe because of wheat sensitivity. You seem to be having wheat sensitivity according to your reports. So he sat back and he was like, oh my God, ever since I'm doing your diet, I've got brown spots on my body. And I looked at those and I was shocked as well. And gradually those spots came up on his face. Also, you can see in this slide, he has the brown spots on his cheek. So I was quite intrigued. And he says, ma'am, my father has taken me to so many doctors since my childhood, and I've never ever pigmented. And this is the first time I'm getting brown spots. So I was going to go to the dermatologist. So anyway, what happened later, after a few months, when he was really spotting, his wife said, I don't think I like the way you're looking now. So I think you better stop this diet. And upon reintroducing wheat back in his diet, the brown spots just vanished. So he became his own control. And this is like, we have multiples of cases with vitiligo and other autoimmune problems, thyroid problems, all of which get better, even diabetes, whether it's type 1, type 2, or type 1.5, whether it's, asthma or joint pains or alopecia, all of these seem to be, and these are patients who have no celiac disease. So wheat sensitivity is seemingly a bigger issue than even celiac disease today. And so it does come under the umbrella of what we call wheat-related disorders. Wheat-related disorders, actually now we can say that includes celiac disease. It includes dermatitis herpetiformis, which is celiac outside the gut, which includes non-celiac wheat sensitivity and wheat allergy. True wheat allergy is different, and it's like a typical allergy where the symptoms are very intense and short-lived, and whereas non-celiac wheat sensitivity and celiac disease are very different. So while all of them have an immunological basis. So I would now move to how to manage these conditions. Grain science is really about elimination of wheat in all its forms: atta, maida, suji, dalia, wheat germ, wheat bran, and semolina, couscous, suji. They're all names for this wheat because people tend to just not connect. Common mistakes: barley, and which also includes beer. Rye, which I already said, is not relevant to Indian conditions because we don't grow rye. But today, yes, rye bread is available, but it is very different from the rye in the spice box. So don't make that mistake. And I have had many patients suffering on this account who eliminate the mustard seeds or the rye seeds from their diet. Spelt, triticale, kamut, again, lesser known grains. Now there is what we call the query, which is, some people eliminate wheat starch, but some people don't, depending on your particular levels of sensitivity. But by and large, I would say I would put it in a safer category than an unsafe category because it doesn't have gluten. Corn is a very big issue. Buckwheat, soya, and oats. I've already told you, oats is a issue because of various reasons. Now, these grains actually do not have gluten in them, and this would also include actually something. I'll talk about dairy a little later. But these grains behave what we call in a manner which we call molecular mimicry. And this term is called cross reactivity, and they behave like, for the immune system, like wheat. So they have some kind of similarity in their proteins, which makes them, produce antibodies to just like wheat, and they become antigens. So they are, relatively uncharted areas and of research, but they are definitely real. And since we are talking about dietary management, these need to be addressed. Because until about, I would say 7-8 years ago, these were always in the safe category. You could have soya, you could have corn, but today there are most people would react to them. The safe grains include rice, corn, and I would say we can talk about corn starch rather than corn as a corn. Millets, all forms of millets are usually all right. Amaranth and quinoa are usually all right. And the flours which we use during the fast times, the Navratra fast, are more or less okay. But like I said, buckwheat can be an issue for certain people, even though it may not have any gluten. Now, about 50% of people who have a gluten intolerance or wheat sensitivity or celiac disease are also intolerant to dairy. So the advice for dietary management includes that at least in the initial days of maybe say first 2-3 months of elimination of wheat, even dairy should be cut down or avoided. Then I would say I would leave it to a case-to-case decision. Some people are okay, some people are not, depending on who you are. So this requires clinical judgment. And foods to be avoided, of course, these are obviously very common foods, including pastas, noodles, macaroni. But alternatives to these are also available. Breads and regular chapatis can be easily replaced today with millets and rice-based products. Breakfast cereals, alcoholic beverages mostly are all right, except beers, stouts, and lagers, which have a barley base. And I've already talked to you about the issue of cross reactivity, so I won't spend more time here. The common tests I've already spoken about. We do not have good tests for gluten intolerance in the form of non-celiac disease. So this is one of our challenges, how to prove non-celiac wheat sensitivity. It's an IgG test, it's a delayed food intolerance test, but it's not a very specific test. So here we use, clinical judgment correlations with other markers and other inflammatory markers, and sometimes we just need to eliminate and see. So we do not have great markers for non-celiac wheat intolerance, but for celiac disease, I've already told you, TTG and EMA are pretty accurate. And something has to be said about TTG, values. The titer is, depending on which lab. So most labs sometimes, the cutoff is say 20. So this is just an example to give you. So if the value is say 10 or 12, this is the level of suspicion for celiac disease should be high, because when we have a full positive TTG, it correlates with end stage celiac disease. So we need not have to wait for that positive to be. Even sometimes physicians ignore a 19 or an 18. Saying that, oh, this is negative, but that's really not the way it should be done. They should be pursued and they should be under observation, or a biopsy should be done. So there are a lot of clinical, judgmental issues where you need to sort of apply. And sometimes, even if both are negative and the person is getting better on an elimination diet, it perhaps is a reason for continuing elimination. So there are other tests which include skin biopsies, gluten challenge, I already told you, blood dot tests, fecal tests, saliva tests, breath tests, genetic tests, and intestinal biopsies I talked about. This is just to tell you that, how we are missing diagnosis, and this, we call it a 1,000-face disease. And, it almost takes some average, they say in the US, also about 10 years for a person to develop from symptoms to detection. So I think with each one of us here talking about it and creating awareness, we should be able to diagnose early, and nobody who has a wheat sensitivity really should be left undiagnosed. So those are our goals. And some of the challenges include dietary compliance, cross-contamination while food is being prepared, food labeling as issues, and medications and some supplements can be a source of gluten, traveling and eating out, psychological issues, particularly among children and adolescents, is a bit is quite disturbing and can be issues, and they cheat. And of course, people who are poor and illiterate, they don't seem to be understanding the importance, and not being able to. Sometimes gluten-free foods for these people can be expensive. So, but essentially, we need to support for people who have been diagnosed with this condition emotionally also, and hand-holding is required. There are a lot of belief systems which and social conditions around us which compel the individual to eat wrong or sometimes or cheat, and sometimes not even disclose to the family, and particularly young women who get married. They don't tell their in-laws about this problem, and they begin to eat wrong, and then they suffer the consequences. And these are all real life examples that we see. So there should be no social issues. There should be no, no kind of stigma with this kind of a condition. But I know people, even young children, whose parents have not disclosed this condition to their school, the authorities. They hide it because they feel that their child may not get admission. So all of these are totally misplaced and should be condemned. And this is just food intolerance, and dietary management is all that is required, and the person can be absolutely normal and live a normal life just with mindful eating. So these need to be addressed also. And it's a permanent condition, particularly celiac disease is a permanent condition. And so it needs to be, of course, that point needs to be addressed. You can't mostly, and there are some examples where they have gotten over it when they had it in childhood, but those are far and few in between. And we need to also talk about associated conditions, thyroid conditions, diabetes. We need to manage that, and sometimes a combination we see of diabetic child and celiac disease are very, very common. So it becomes a little more difficult. But I think today the market is getting better and awareness is growing. And one important point here I must, address is that the diet, a simple gluten-free diet is not enough. We need, because just if you continue taking no gluten and make poor choices and just have rice and no vegetables, and you take starchy processed food, which is gluten-free, it can be counterproductive. And there are studies to suggest that you can have nutritional deficiencies, you can have, high risk to diabetes and cardiac problems because of poor selections of a gluten-free diet. So a simple gluten-free diet is not enough. A healthy gluten-free diet must be focused on. And people say, oh, this is a gluten-free cake, or this is a gluten-free cookie, or a rusk, and they have so much of high glycemic, starchy and high glycemic food, which can become, cause inflammation in its own way. So needs to be addressed, and that's what a whole area which I have not included as a slide, but we call dangers of a gluten-free diet, which need to be emphasized. Labels, of course, we need to have, and read labels from time to time. And hidden sources of gluten are important to understand. A lot of processed food can have it. The convenience foods, that ready-to-eat foods, malt and malt extract and flavorings can be a source of gluten. Breadcrumbs, binders and fillers and coatings, modified starches maybe. Hing is a common culprit because it has, even though we do use very small amounts, hing as a powder is almost 98, 99% wheat flour. Mustard powder also in very often is wheat flour. Soya sauce is a common one. Play-doh and supplements, and of course contaminated flour mills. So a lot of people are using, say, millet flour, but they don't check whether this is produced in a gluten-free facility. So contamination through flour mills is very common and a common culprit. So either one takes these millet flours or alternative flours from dedicated gluten-free manufacturers, or you can employ your own flour mill at home and start grinding the flour. So be sure that there is no contamination there. So I think whether it is, I would say, celiac disease or whether it's wheat intolerance, these are really invisible epidemics. And I'll just kind of wind up and with some key takeaways. It's a highly underdiagnosed condition. It can come up at any age. There is no social strata, and many mostly remain undiagnosed, and symptoms may be atypical or not there at all. Very diverse and its presentation and impacts both physical and mental health. And it is the root cause of the epidemics of deficiency diseases in our country. Malnutrition and obesity, they enter both the spectrum of lifestyle-related disorders and infectious diseases. So we have regulatory bodies like the FSSAI who have taken this cause very seriously and have paid attention to this and are looking at labeling and guidance to the consumer. And in 2019, the Celiac Society of India had the first international conference in January to put the spotlight on these issues, and it was very well attended. We had experts from over 14 countries across the world. And this was the first book in, I think, 2008, where we addressed, the issue of wheat more towards celiac disease along with recipes. And I think there is so much more learning after that. And I'm currently working on my next book addressing non-celiac wheat sensitivity. So thank you very much for your attention, and we'll be happy to take questions if Dr. Rao permits, if there's time.
Thank you so much, Rishi. So informative, so insightful, and the way you walk through it, right from the history to the diagnosis to the variety or differences and what it can do to us. You're absolutely right. I think the chat box is full of some questions. So with your permission, can I ask you the first question, which is being asked by Neetu Kansya. She is concerned that if you have a type 1 diabetic kid, is that child also prone to a celiac disease?
Yes, absolutely. Type 1 diabetics are usually, they have, whether it's type 1 diabetes or any other autoimmune condition, they usually come in pairs, and screening for celiac disease is important. But if she's asked this question, I'm very tempted to share a few of my case studies where we are managing type 1 diabetics at a level which we never thought. There are several cases to be cited here, but the most dramatic is the one who we have started treating right from the diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. And that child, the good news is that we all know that type 1 diabetics require insulin for the rest of their life. And this particular child, who is now 3 years old, and I've managed him for 6 months, he has not had any insulin in the last 6 months from the time of diagnosis, except when he was in hospital. So we are managing him with the grain science that I've shared with you, and of course, elimination of dairy and changing the glycemic index of the diet. So it's a healthy diet, and it's a controlled carbohydrate diet, and this child has been completely insulin free. But that may not be the case for everybody, but certainly there is merit in looking at elimination of the grains, which I mentioned to you, and cutting back dairy, and of course, looking at the gut microbiome and treating the type 1 diabetic. And always, definitely, it's a part of the protocol to screen for celiac disease that your physician should be doing. Also, there is something which I've missed in my conversation, is the fact that when you have a positive diagnosis for celiac disease, there is a 10% chance that the first-degree relatives will have celiac disease. So screening for first-degree relatives is a part of the protocol. And what we normally see today, and research also supports the fact that if you have a celiac patient in your family, then the first degree relatives are either celiac or they are wheat sensitive. So I think these are new learnings.
Thank you. I think Prerna wants to know that is this something which is genetic? Insha wants to know whether it is genetic or not, celiac disease.
It has a very strong genetic component.
And can
And
this
the genes are now very, I mean, new genes are being identified, but 2 or 3 genes are very typical. Actually, DQ8 and DQ10 are associated with celiac disease.
and it can occur at any specific age, or youngsters maybe, or like you just pointed out that another comorbidity probably could be one of the reasons also.
Yes, see, celiac disease you're born with. If you have it, you require the trigger, the triology. Like I said, the gluten has to be introduced, and so it will manifest. But the manifestations can be in childhood or at any time in life. Today, I mean, just last week, I have diagnosed a 80-year-old celiac who has had a normal life. She has had no infertility, nothing except a little history of anemia. But only as of now, she developed diarrhea the last 2 years and some weight loss, and she's been diagnosed. But she has obviously had it all her life, but it was not diagnosed. So manifestations can appear at any time, but you may be asymptomatic or silent.
Right. Thank you. So we have also Natasha finding out that if you could throw a little more light on the TTG values and the diagnostic and management. I mean, management she's covered, of course, in absolute detail, but probably a little more specific as to if you have symptoms, what is the first test you should go in for?
So this is, like I said, the TTG is a very specific test for celiac disease. But sometimes when we don't have a positive, if it's a borderline or just a high normal, we cannot ignore it. Like we also need to correlate with symptoms. We need to see other values in the blood work, like we address the nutritional issues, whether it's iron levels, B12 levels, the other ferritin levels, hemoglobin. So all of these things need to be correlated, whether there is osteoporosis, whether there is any other form of autoimmunity. So with this, just a simple TTG should not be used to, diagnose. And we see these kind of patients suffer all their lives who have just been told that they don't have celiac disease because their TTG was normal. And they go through their life, and only when they are 45, 50, when again because of the persistent problems they go through endoscopies and then they are diagnosed. So this requires clinical correlation.
Thank you.
And there are also inflammatory markers. There are other markers as well, and like I told you, there are other tests. So we need to look at other. If you are sure that there is a problem which is not getting diagnosed, which TTG is not picking up.
So I hope you got the answer. We also have Dr. Goswami who wants to know that, if you're asymptomatic, for celiac disease, so what are these, initial symptoms you would witness, right at the beginning of the disease? What should you look out for?
I think the most non-specific symptom and common symptom includes fatigue and, just not feeling fresh in the morning, and maybe a achy body, or brain fog, or just, poor concentration. These are very common signs, or joint pains. Sometimes you have none of that and you may have some skin manifestations. So, or, if you do a blood work, you can see some, hints of deficiencies up there, or the inflammation or the inflammatory marker is positive. And here I will, I'm tempted to share this, maybe too much information, but since it's a different forum, I will say that this is not in research, but my observation says that, CRP, which is a marker for inflammation, is more correlated with non-celiac weight sensitivity than with celiac. So, but you need to sort of look at calprotectin, other markers of gut inflammation. So, yeah, I mean, between the blood work and the symptoms, and there is something to be said here that I would just say, for a layman, if there is a problem persisting in your body, if there is something which is nagging, and it is not, it is recurring, it is not responding to treatment. If it's just a simple acid problem, a reflux, or anything like that, or just constipation, anything which is not, which should not be there and is persisting, your the red flags should be raised, and you should, go deeper into figuring out what you're suffering from.
So if you're not tired, Ishi, just one more, and then we'll be able to wrap up. There is somebody's concern that there is a 60-year-old lady who has type 2 diabetes, and the relatives have a positive history of celiac disease. What chances does she have that she'll also end up with it, since she's also having some kind of a malabsorption syndrome?
Can you just say the last part again?
Since the last 2 months, she's experiencing diarrhea. And since her relatives are positive with celiac disease, she herself is suffering from diabetes mellitus type 2.
Yes, so absolutely, her celiac test should be done, TTG and anti-endomycelial antibodies, either one of them. Or it should also be tested for non-celiac meat sensitivity, the IgG, delayed food intolerance test. And this should not be confused with the food allergy test. So this should be, the IgG test, delayed food intolerance. It's called food intolerance test. Both should be done. And of course, her nutritional markers should be done. And certainly, if there is celiac in the family, this should be addressed. And there's no two ways about it. They definitely should be looking at it as a possibility.
Right. Thank you, Ishi, for that. And there are a lot of people who want to know that what is the time taken for your, digestive system, gut to be completely gluten-free once you've switched to a non-gluten diet?
That's a great question. If the individual has zero exposure to wheat, more or less zero exposure, it takes about a full year for the intestinal, damage to rectify or to repair. That's the average. Some people can even take 2 years, but usually it's about a year. And of course, it is just, one part of it is elimination. I've spoken about the nutritional deficiencies are also important. The gut support in terms of probiotics and prebiotics. So it's a whole system of gut healing. But usually elimination and supportive diet should take about a year or so for recovery to happen.